David Dobrik's ex-pal, Jeff Wittek, sues him for $10 million over his near fatal stunt. And I thought this would be a pretty interesting article to kind of like cover because David Dobrik, from what it seems, is willing to do pretty much anything for content, and thus will do anything in a sense to basically make money. And you basically are in a situation where you have like a boss who employs his pals in quotes and basically is willing to put them in whatever situation possible to try to get the most entertaining content. And that gets into a situation where how much is too much? How far is, still not crossing the line that is like, hey, you know, you kind of overstepped your bounds. So David Dobrik's former friend and collaborator is suing the YouTube star over a near-death stunt that landed him in the hospital in 2020. Jeff Wittek is seeking $10 million in damages to cover the cost of lost wages and earning capacity, as well as hospital bills he attained as a result of the accident, according to TMZ. Also, by the way, one of the reasons why I say that David Dobrik is pretty much willing to do whatever he can to try to make as much money as possible is that he teamed up with basically a fraud NFT scheme, which scammed his fans out of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. Basically, I think over $100,000 was scammed out of that whole fiasco. So the Jeff FM podcaster, 32, alleged in the lawsuit that Dobrik, 25, had been operating an excavator that was placed in the ocean for a stunt in June 2020 and asked his pals to swing from the machine using a rope while simultaneously riding several objects. And that is a really, really busted eye. Now, Wittek said when it was his turn to go, Dobrik allegedly began swinging the excavator too fast, which caused him to slam into it and get seriously injured, according to TMZ. The social media star did not detail his injuries in the lawsuit, but previously spoke about them in a February 25th, 2022 video on his YouTube channel titled Dear David. I nearly died. I came an inch from death and an inch from going blind. I have lifelong brain injuries, Wittek claimed in the episode. He added, I'm not trying to lecture people, it's just an emotional thing. I had my face smashed in, and one thing I asked from him was to not blame me for it. And leaked footage of the accident shows Wittek crashing into the crane and subsequently falling into the water before his friends rush to his aid and shout, call the ambulance. And in March, Dobrik called Wittek's accident the effing worst. That day is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I would effing do anything to take that day back, he said on his Views video podcast. Now here's the thing. Think about that first statement that he just said, right? That day is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. This is David Dobrik saying that, okay? The worst thing that happened to you when your pal got his face smashed into a crane. I wish it was me up there. It's the most unfortunate thing ever, and it's, crappy. It's an accident. That's what it was. It's an accident. Which, is it an accident? Probably. He probably didn't purposely smash him right into the crane. But the thing to really understand, too, right, is that if you're the boss of a team of people, you are basically responsible for everything that happens to them while they're under your supervision, right? Like, that's the reality, right? So, even if, let's say, David Dobrik wasn't operating the crane that eventually smashed in Wittek's face, if he was just the owner of a company and he had like a general manager and all that kind of stuff, right? That was overseeing everything that was, you know, operating the crane. Not David Dobrik himself, but let's just say he had a general manager doing that on his behalf, and the general manager technically caused this accident for, like, this caused this accident to basically potentially happen. David Dobrik would still be responsible, right? Like, that's the thing that people kind of like still need to understand, right? Responsibility always goes towards the top of like the Christmas tree of the pyramid, right? The head, regardless if they are directly responsible or not, ends up responsible for the outcome for the situation regardless, right? So I don't think David Dobrik is going to be paying out $10 million over this, but he's probably going to pay at minimum $1 million. I would not be surprised if he ended up having to pay Jeff Wittek at least $1 million for this whole fiasco. Because based off my memory, I'm pretty certain David Dobrik didn't really accept responsibility right off the bat. And that is going to be probably a pretty big issue for him. And I don't think he was necessarily remorseful for the situation right off the bat either. I think everyone wanted to try to keep it like on the hush hush, no one say anything, blah 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 kind of stuff. So it'd be pretty interesting to see what happens. I do hope that Jeff Wittek does get paid a certain amount of money for a settlement because he's technically entitled to it due to what happened, right? This is a work accident in a sense, and the job does need to end up paying for, or the insurance company that David Dobrik probably has will end up paying for it. The only thing is that might end up being a situation now where, well, does it even make sense for David Dobrik to even get employees anymore? Or does it make any sense for David Dobrik to basically do any sort of crazy content or crazy, potentially dangerous stunts for content, for clicks, and all that kind of stuff, right? Because the interesting thing about David Dobrik's business is that he doesn't necessarily make money from the click, like from, people just watching his content, but he makes a lot of money on the back end. So what I mean by this, he gets millions and millions of views all over social media. David Dobrik, his brand, all that kind of stuff, right? But he doesn't really make any money from the ads that are ran, like from YouTube ads, right? He basically makes nothing from that because a lot of the stuff he ends up using in his videos are like copyright music and all that kind of stuff. But the back end, so with affiliate marketing, selling his own products, doing sponsorship deals, he's able to generate potentially millions of dollars every single month, right? So it's a very interesting business model where you don't necessarily make money directly because of the clicks that you are getting, but you are making money due to people that are clicking on your videos, on your content, and then, yeah, basically transacting with you in some way. So it's very interesting. David Dobrik is probably still going to keep making more and more and more money. This is just like a situation where, like, regardless of the business model, the boss is basically always responsible. And David Dobrik is pretty much going to have to probably pay a pretty hefty sum to Jeff Wittek. That being said, for anyone out there, regardless of age, you should really get health insurance. And the reason why I say that is because let's say that Jeff Wittek did not have health insurance. Let's say that David Dobrik did not have like insurance at all for like workers' injuries or whatever, right? Jeff Wittek and David Dobrik would probably be end up screwed, right? Jeff Wittek would be screwed because he's going to be suffering from a lot of medical complications in the future that might be related to this or might be like really far related to it, right? Where he might end up having to deal with like PTSD or maybe like one of his organs is basically reacting in a bad way due to the stress that is caused to his body because of this accident, etc., etc., etc. Or maybe the drugs that he has to take is affecting one of his organs in a bad way or his health, all that kind of sort of stuff. And this is why it's extremely important, regardless of how old you are, to have health insurance. Because health insurance, regardless of the level, will still make things a lot better for you in terms of like just living everyday life. Because if you get hit with a medical bill in the United States and you do not have health insurance, that could get into a really financially destructive situation. One of which that you may never actually be able to recover from, or you may have to actually go through bankruptcy. And even then, that's also a little bit iffy, right? So keep that in mind. Get good health insurance, stay out of debt so that you could survive if you can't work. Because that's another thing, too. Like, say that you are basically crippled for a few months. If you have no money in the bank and if you got debt payments coming in every single month, you're basically screwed, right? Regardless of when you end up getting paid by a settlement, if there's going to be a settlement, like if you can't work, if you got no money in the bank, you can't eat, right? You got so many bills to pay, you probably can't even live in your apartment anymore or your house or whatever. So make sure to try to get out of debt, create an emergency fund, and stay very financially safe. So if you want to learn how to get out of debt and master your money, go to 40inbox.com.